boy stands in the examination room at Camp McCain in Mississippi, shirtless and shaking, and says the words in broken English before the doctor even touches him. "I am infected." His voice is flat matter-of-fact, as if he is reporting the weather. The camp doctor, Major Elliot Brenneman, steps closer and sees what the intake officer missed in the processing line. The boy's torso is covered in wounds. 9 separate puncture sites scattered across his chest, abdomen, and back, like someone threw gravel at him from different directions. Some of the wounds are scabbed over. Some are still weeping. One on his left side, just below the ribs, is ringed with red streaks that climb toward his armpit like vines. The smell hits the doctor next, the unmistakable rot of deep infection. Major Brenneman looks at the boy's face and sees something that disturbs him more than the wounds themselves. The boy is not afraid. He is resigned. He has been waiting to die for so long that arrival at an American prison camp feels like nothing more than a change of location. We are at Camp McCain, Mississippi in late April 1945. The camp holds over 3,000 German prisoners of war, most of them captured in North Africa or Italy and shipped to the American South for internment. The camp is surrounded by pine trees and farmland, far from any major city, far from the war that is now collapsing in its final weeks across the Atlantic. The prisoners work in cotton fields and lumber mills guarded by American soldiers who are too old or too injured to fight overseas. It is not a harsh camp by prisoner of war standards. The food is adequate. The barracks are clean. Men survive here. But today, on the afternoon of April 23, 1945, a transport truck arrives at the camp gates carrying 20 new prisoners from a processing center in Virginia. And one of them is different. His name is listed on the intake paperwork as Matthias Keller, 18 years old, captured by American forces near the Elbe River in central Germany 2 weeks earlier. He is small for 18, barely 5 feet 6 inches tall. So thin that his uniform hangs on him like a tarp over a fence post. His face is covered in dirt, and his eyes are hollowed out from lack of sleep. When the transport truck rolls to a stop in the prison yard and the rear gate drops open, Matthias climbs down slowly, favoring his left side. The intake officer, a sergeant from Alabama who has processed thousands of prisoners over the past 2 years, tells the new arrivals to form a line for the standard medical inspection. It is routine. Lice check, visible injuries, general health assessment. The men shuffle into formation. Matthias stands near the end of the line, his jacket draped over one arm. His steps are careful and deliberate, like a man walking on ice. The sergeant works his way down the line, checking each prisoner quickly. Most of them are in good health despite the journey. They have been fed during transport. They have been allowed to rest. The American military follows the Geneva Convention strictly when it comes to prisoners of war, and these men know it. When the sergeant reaches Matthias, he notices the stains on the boy's undershirt immediately, brown and yellow spreading out from multiple points on his torso like ink blots on paper. The sergeant stops. "Remove your jacket," he says. Matthias hesitates. Then he peels off the jacket, slowly wincing as the fabric pulls away from his skin. The sergeant sees the stains more clearly now. Old blood and something else. Something wet. The sergeant calls for the camp medic. A corporal from Tennessee arrives within minutes. He is a career soldier, too old for combat duty, but experienced enough to recognize trouble when he sees it. He takes one look at Matthias and makes an immediate decision. "This one goes straight to the hospital," the corporal says. "Do not finish the intake. Get him to Major Brenneman now." Matthias does not protest. He does not ask questions. He simply picks up his jacket and begins walking in the direction the corporal points. His gait is slow and measured. He holds his left arm slightly away from his body. He winces when he breathes too deeply. The corporal follows behind, noting everything: the way the boy moves, the way he holds himself, the faint smell of infection that clings to him like smoke. This is not a healthy prisoner. This is a boy who should already be dead. The hospital building at Camp McCain is a converted barracks on the eastern edge of the compound. It has 20 beds, a small surgery, and a staff of 3 doctors and 6 nurses. The facility handles routine medical issues: broken bones, infections, The occasional appendicitis. Nothing complicated. Major Elliot Brenneman is the senior physician, 42 years old. A general practitioner from Atlanta who volunteered for military service in 1942. He spent 2 years in field hospitals across Europe treating wounded soldiers in conditions that would have broken most men. In 1944, after a bout of pneumonia nearly killed him, he was reassigned to prisoner of war medical duty in the American South. It is easier work, safer, but also more isolated. Brenneman rarely sees the kind of trauma he witnessed in the combat zones. The prisoners who arrive at Camp McCain are generally healthy. The German military, even in collapse, does not send its sickest men across the Atlantic. But when the corporal from Tennessee walks through the hospital door with Matthias Keller beside him, Brenneman knows immediately that this case is not routine. The boy is young, too young, and the way he carries himself suggests pain that has been endured for a long time. "Put him in examination room 2, Brenneman says. The room is small and whitewashed with a metal examination table, a cabinet of medical supplies, and a single overhead light. Matthias enters and stands beside the table waiting for instructions. "Sit down," Brenneman says. "Remove your shirt." Matthias does so without hesitation. He lifts the stained undershirt over his head and drops it on the floor. What Brenneman sees makes him pause. The boy's torso is a map of violence. There are 9 separate wounds scattered across his chest, abdomen, and back. Each one is a puncture or laceration caused by shrapnel or shell fragments. The wounds are in different stages of healing. Some are old scars, white and puckered, the tissue thick and ridged. Some are partially healed, covered with fresh scabs that look ready to crack open. Some are still open, the edges red and inflamed, the centers filled with yellowish discharge. Brenneman pulls on gloves and begins his examination. He starts with the oldest scars and works his way toward the freshest injuries, sketching the boy's torso on a chart and marking each wound with a number. The first 3 wounds, all on the upper chest, are healed but badly scarred. The tissue is hard to the touch, suggesting they healed without proper medical care. The next 4 wounds clustered around the abdomen are in various stages of infection. 2 are scabbed over but oozing pus when Brenneman presses gently on the surrounding tissue. 2 are open and raw, the flesh around them swollen and hot. The final 2 wounds are the worst. One is on the lower back, a deep crater, as if someone scooped out a chunk of flesh with a spoon. The other is just below the left rib, surrounded by red streaks that radiate outward like the branches of a tree. Brenneman recognizes the pattern immediately. Blood poisoning. The infection is spreading through the lymphatic system. He steps back and looks at the boy's face. "How did you get these wounds?" Matthias answers in heavily accented English. His words are slow and careful, each one chosen with effort. Different times, different places. Brenneman writes this down, then looks at the boy again. "Explain." Matthias takes a breath. The movement causes him to wince. The first 3 wounds came from an artillery shell in France in August 1944. The next 4 came from a grenade in Belgium in December 1944. The last 2 came from machine gun fire near the Elbe River in April 1945. 3 days before I was captured. Brenneman stops writing. He looks at the boy in disbelief. "You were wounded 3 separate times and you were sent back to fight each time." Matthias nods. There were no hospitals, there were no doctors. There were only bandages and orders to return to the line. Brenneman sets down his pen. He has treated thousands of wounded men over the past 3 years. He has seen injuries of every kind. But he has never seen anything like this. A boy 18 years old carrying the accumulated damage of 3 separate combat events, none of which received proper treatment. "Do you still have the shrapnel inside you?" Matthias nods again. Brenneman calls for an X-ray immediately. The camp has a portable X-ray machine, old and temperamental but functional. A nurse brings Matthias to the radiography room and positions him carefully, taking images of his chest, abdomen, and back. 20 minutes later, Brenneman is standing in front of the light box in his office, staring at the films with a nurse beside him. What he sees confirms the boy's story and reveals something even more disturbing. The X-rays show 9 separate pieces of metal embedded in Matthias Keller's body, scattered through muscle tissue, lodged against ribs, pressing against organs. But the shocking part is not the number of fragments. The shocking part is the variety. The shrapnel pieces are different sizes, different shapes, and based on their positions and the surrounding tissue damage, they entered the body at different times and from different directions. The 3 fragments in the upper chest are small and symmetrical, consistent with artillery shrapnel. The surrounding bone shows signs of old fractures that healed improperly. The 4 fragments in the abdomen are irregular and jagged, consistent with grenade fragments. One of them is dangerously close to the liver. Another is pressing against the lower edge of the stomach. The tissue around these fragments shows chronic inflammation, meaning they have been causing damage for months. The 2 fragments near the back and the ribs are the largest and the most recent. One is a twisted piece of metal lodged in the muscle of the lower back. The other, the one below the ribs surrounded by infection, is a bullet fragment that has created an abscess. A pocket of pus and dead tissue that is slowly poisoning the boy's bloodstream. Brenneman turns to the nurse. "Call Colonel Harrington. Tell him I need to see him immediately." 15 minutes later, Brenneman is sitting in the camp commander's office with the X-ray films spread across the desk. Colonel James Harrington is a career officer from Virginia who has been running Camp McCain since 1943. He has dealt with thousands of German prisoners, and he prides himself on running a camp that follows the Geneva Conventions to the letter. But as Brenneman explains the situation, Harrington's expression grows darker. This boy was wounded 3 separate times over a period of 9 months. He has 9 pieces of shrapnel or shell fragments still lodged in his body. He received no proper medical treatment for any of the wounds, and according to his intake paperwork, he is 18 years old. Harrington picks up the paperwork and scans it. Birth date, July 15th, 1926. Brenneman nods. That means he was 16 years old when he received the first set of wounds. He was a child sent into combat wounded and sent back without treatment. Wounded again, sent back again. Wounded a 3rd time and only captured because he physically could not run anymore. Harrington sets down the paperwork. He looks at the X-ray films for a long moment. This is evidence of a war crime. Brenneman does not disagree. Harrington asks the question that matters most. "Can you save him?" Brenneman admits he does not know. The infection below the ribs is spreading. If it reaches the bloodstream completely, the boy will go into septic shock and die. The only way to stop the infection is to remove the shrapnel fragments and clean out the abscesses. But that means major surgery, possibly multiple surgeries, and the boy is already weak from months of malnutrition and blood loss. Brenneman estimates the boy has a 50% chance of surviving the surgery and a 70% chance of dying within the next week if they do nothing. Harrington considers this. Then he gives his approval. Proceed with the surgery. Document everything. If this boy survives, his story will be part of the war crimes documentation being compiled by Allied intelligence. Brenneman returns to the hospital and finds Matthias sitting on the examination table, his shirt back on his hands, resting in his lap. The boy looks up when Brenneman enters. "I need to explain what is going to happen," Brenneman says. "The surgery will be extensive. We will have to open multiple sites on your torso to remove the shrapnel and clean out the infections. You will be under general anesthesia. The recovery will take weeks, possibly months. There is a significant risk that you will not survive." Matthias listens without expression. Then he asks a question that surprises Brenneman. "If I die during the surgery, will you write to my family?" Brenneman pauses. "Do you have family?" Matthias looks down at his hands. "I do not know. I lost contact with my father in January. The town where I grew up was bombed in February. I have no idea if my father is alive or if the house is still standing. But if you can find them, I want them to know I did not die in combat. I want them to know I died in a hospital with a doctor trying to help me." Brenneman does not know what to say to this. The boy is 18 years old, and he may already be an orphan. He has survived 9 months with untreated wounds, and now he is asking an enemy doctor to notify a family that may no longer exist. "I will do my best," Brenneman says. Matthias nods. He seems satisfied with this answer. But before we go any further, Brenneman says, I need to understand the full story. How did you end up in the German military at 16 years old? Matthias speaks slowly. His English is improving as he relaxes slightly. I grew up in a small town near Dresden in eastern Germany. My father worked in a factory. My mother died when I was 12. I had one older brother, Wilhelm, who was conscripted into the Wehrmacht in 1942. He was killed on the Eastern Front in 1943. Matthias pauses. The memory is still painful. When I turned 16 in July 1944, I received a letter ordering me to report for military service. Germany was losing the war by then. The casualty rates were catastrophic. The military was conscripting anyone who could hold a rifle, including boys who should have been in school. He continues, I was sent to a training camp for 2 weeks. I was given a uniform and a rifle. Then I was assigned to an infantry unit defending the French coast near Caen. I arrived just as the Allied breakout from Normandy was beginning. Brenneman writes this down. He already knows the history. The summer of 1944. The collapse of the German defences in France. The desperate retreat eastward. Tell me about the first wounds. Matthias closes his eyes, remembering. Within 3 days, my unit was under constant artillery bombardment. We were retreating, trying to hold positions that could not be held. On the 3rd day, an artillery shell landed about 10 meters from my position. I was thrown backward by the blast. When I woke up, my chest was bleeding from 3 separate puncture wounds. What happened next? A medic pulled the largest pieces of shrapnel out with forceps. No anesthetic. He wrapped the wounds with gauze and told me to rejoin my squad. There was no hospital. There was no evacuation. The unit was retreating, and anyone who could walk was expected to keep fighting. Brenneman feels a cold anger building in his chest. He has seen battlefield medicine. He knows the compromises that must be made under fire. But what Matthias is describing goes beyond compromise. It is systematic neglect. How long did you fight with those wounds? I fought through August and September as the German army retreated across France and into Belgium. By October, the wounds on my chest had scabbed over, but they hurt constantly. I could not lift my rifle above my shoulders without pain. And the second set of wounds, Matthias opens his eyes. In December, my unit was caught in the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the west. During a counterattack near Bastogne, a grenade exploded inside the building where I and 5 other soldiers were sheltering. He pauses. The memory is vivid. I was knocked unconscious. When I woke, I had 4 new wounds in my abdomen. 2 of the other soldiers were dead. This time there was not even a medic. I wrapped my own wounds with strips torn from a dead man's shirt and kept moving. The offensive collapsed. The retreat continued. And I kept fighting because stopping meant being shot for desertion. Brenneman stops writing. He looks at the boy sitting in front of him, 18 years old, carrying the weight of a war that should never have been his to fight. And the final wounds, Matthias takes a deep breath. This part is harder to tell. Those came in the last days of the war, mid-April 1945. My unit was near the Elbe River, trying to retreat west toward the American lines to avoid being captured by the Soviets. We were caught in a crossfire between American and German forces. He stops. Brenneman waits. The machine gun fire came from behind us, from German troops who were firing on anyone trying to surrender. Brenneman stares at the boy. You were shot by your own side. Matthias nods. The officers had given orders to shoot deserters on sight. About 30 of us decided to surrender together. We thought if we all went at once, they could not stop us. We walked toward the American lines with our hands up. The German machine guns opened fire from behind. Half the group was killed, 15 men. He touches his left side gently. I was hit twice, once in the back and once below the ribs. I fell into a ditch and lay there for 6 hours until American soldiers found me. By then I was too weak to stand. I was bleeding, feverish and delirious. The Americans put me on a truck with other prisoners and sent me through the processing chain that eventually brought me here. Brenneman sits back in his chair. He has heard many stories from German prisoners over the past year. Stories of defeat, of chaos, of units dissolving in the final weeks of the war. But this is different. This is a boy who was wounded by his own officers for trying to save his life. Why did you try to surrender to the Americans instead of the Soviets? Matthias looks at him as if the answer is obvious. Because we were told the Soviets would kill us. And we were told the Americans would kill us too. But at least the Americans might kill us quickly. There is a long silence. And yet here you are, Brenneman says quietly, in an American hospital, with an American doctor preparing to operate on you. Matthias looks at him. For the first time there is something like confusion in his eyes. Yes, I do not understand it either. Brenneman stands up. He has heard enough. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning and he has preparations to make. But before he leaves the room, he stops and looks at the boy one more time. What you have survived is extraordinary. The human body is not meant to endure what you have endured, but you are still here. That means something. Matthias does not respond. He simply nods. Brenneman walks out of the examination room and down the hallway to his office. He closes the door behind him and sits at his desk. The X-ray films are still on the light box glowing faintly in the dim room. He looks at the 9 bright spots on the images. 9 pieces of metal. 9 separate acts of violence inflicted on a boy who should have been in school learning mathematics or literature or carpentry. Instead, he was given a rifle and thrown into the collapsing machinery of a war that devoured children as easily as it devoured cities. Brenneman has a son, had a son, David Brenneman, 19 years old, killed in Normandy in early June 1944, the same summer that Matthias Keller was being conscripted in Germany. David had blonde hair like Matthias, the same slight build, the same quiet way of speaking. Brenneman keeps a photograph of David in his desk drawer. He takes it out now and looks at it. David in his uniform smiling at the camera. Confident. Ready. He died on a beach in France, shot by a German soldier who might have been 16 years old, or 17, or 18. And now, a year later, Brenneman is preparing to operate on a German boy who could have been that soldier. The irony is not lost on him. But David's last letter, written 3 days before he was killed, sits in the same drawer as the photograph. Brenneman takes it out and reads it for the 100th time. Dad, if I don't make it home, I want you to know I'm proud to be your son. You taught me that being a doctor means healing people no matter who they are or where they come from. If something happens to me, promise you will keep doing that. Promise you will not let this war make you forget what matters. Brenneman folds the letter carefully and puts it back in the drawer. He looks at the X-ray films again. 9 fragments, 9 wounds, 9 chances for Matthias Keller to have died before he ever reached this camp. But he did not die. He survived. And now it is Brenneman's job to make sure he keeps surviving. Tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, the surgery will begin. And Brenneman will do everything in his power to save this boy, not because he is German or because he is the enemy, but because he is a patient, and because somewhere in a grave in France, Brenneman's son would have expected nothing less. The night before the surgery, Elliot Brenneman does not sleep. He lies in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the camp settling into darkness. The hum of generators, the distant voices of guards changing shifts, the crickets in the pine trees that surround the compound. He thinks about David. Not the David of the photograph frozen at 19 with his confident smile, but the David of memory. The boy who broke his arm falling out of a tree at age 7. The teenager who wanted to be a pilot but settled for infantry because the Air Corps had too many applicants. The young man who wrote letters home every week describing the countryside of England, the food, the other soldiers, the overwhelming boredom of waiting. David never wrote about fear. He never complained. But Brenneman could read between the lines. The letters that came in May of 1944 had a different tone. Shorter sentences, less detail, a sense of something enormous approaching. The last letter arrived on June 10th, 1944. Written June 3rd, 4 days before David died on June 7th. Brenneman has read it so many times that he has memorized every word, but he never told anyone about the final paragraph. The part where David wrote about a German prisoner the MPs brought through their camp. A boy, maybe 17, captured after a skirmish near the coast. David wrote, "He looked terrified. The MPs were rough with him, but not cruel. I gave him water. He drank it like he had not seen water in days. I keep thinking about what it must be like for him. Pulled into a war he probably did not want, told to fight for a cause he might not believe in. And now a prisoner thousands of miles from home, not knowing if he will ever see his family again." And then the line that Brenneman cannot forget. "Dad, I know he is the enemy, but he is also just a kid. If something happens to me, promise me you will remember that. Promise me you will not let this war make you forget that the people we are fighting are still people." The next day, June 7th, 1944, David was killed on Omaha Beach. Brenneman closes his eyes and tries to sleep. But sleep does not come. At 2 in the morning, he gets out of bed and walks to the hospital. The building is quiet, except for the soft footsteps of the night nurse making her rounds. Brenneman goes to the intensive care section and looks through the small window in the door. Matthias Keller is asleep in the corner bed. His breathing is shallow and rapid. Even in sleep, his body is fighting the infection. Brenneman watches him for a long moment. Then he turns and walks to his office. The X-ray films are still on the light box. He studies them again, planning the surgery in his mind. The incisions, the sequence of extractions, the risks at each stage, 9 fragments, 9 separate removals, hours of work, and a 50% chance the boy will not survive. Brenneman has performed hundreds of surgeries. He has worked in field hospitals where the wounded arrived faster than he could treat them. He has made impossible decisions about who to save and who to let go. But this is different. This is not a battlefield. This is not an emergency. He has time to prepare, time to think, time to ask himself why he is willing to risk everything to save an enemy soldier. The answer, he realizes, is simple: because David asked him to. At 6:30 in the morning, the surgical team assembles. Brenneman has arranged for a second doctor to assist. Dr. William Foster, a surgeon from the civilian hospital in Grenada, Mississippi, 40 miles south. Foster arrived the night before and reviewed the X-ray films with Brenneman. He is experienced, calm, and willing to help. 2 surgical nurses complete the team. Both women, both veterans of military hospitals in Europe before being reassigned stateside. They have seen everything. They do not flinch. The operating room is a converted barracks room on the 2nd floor of the hospital. It has surgical lights, a steel table, and equipment borrowed from the Grenada hospital. The room is not ideal, but it will work. At 6:45, Matthias Keller is brought in on a wheeled gurney. He is awake, his eyes tracking the movement around him. A nurse has marked his torso with ink, 9 small circles indicating the locations of the embedded fragments. Brenneman approaches the table and looks down at the boy. "Are you ready?" Matthias nods. He does not speak. There is nothing left to say. The anesthesiologist, a captain from the main hospital at Camp Shelby, administers the general anesthetic through an intravenous line. Within 2 minutes, Matthias is unconscious. Brenneman picks up a scalpel. The surgery begins at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning on April 24th, 1945. Hour 1. Brenneman makes the first incision over the wound below the left ribs, the one surrounded by red streaks, the one that will kill Matthias within days if left untreated. The skin parts easily under the blade. Underneath, the tissue is wrong, grey and black instead of healthy pink, soaked with pus. The smell hits immediately, a thick, cloying rot that fills the room despite the ventilation. Brenneman uses forceps and a scalpel to cut away the dead tissue. The process is called debridement, removing the necrotic material to expose the healthy flesh underneath. It is slow, meticulous work. Each cut must be precise. Too shallow, and the infection remains. Too deep, and he risks damaging vital structures. He cuts away nearly half a pound of infected muscle before he reaches the source of the problem. The bullet fragment is lodged against the 10th rib, a twisted piece of copper-jacketed steel about the size of a dime. The impact created a pocket in the tissue, a space where bacteria have been growing unchecked for weeks. The abscess is the size of a small egg. Brenneman drains it carefully, watching the yellowish pus flow into the surgical basin. Then he uses the forceps to grip the fragment. It does not want to come out. The metal has been in place for 2 weeks, and the surrounding tissue has begun to encapsulate it. He pulls gently, steadily, working the fragment free. It resists, then suddenly releases. Brenneman lifts it out and drops it into a metal tray with a soft clink. Fragment 1. He irrigates the wound with saline solution, checking for any remaining debris. The tissue is clean. He moves to the next site. The second incision is on the lower back, over the deep crater that Matthias described. Brenneman cuts through the layers of skin and muscle, exposing the wound bed. The fragment here is larger, a twisted piece of shrapnel the size of a quarter. It has torn through the latissimus dorsi muscle and lodged against the spine. Not touching the vertebrae, but close. Dangerously close. Brenneman works carefully, dissecting around the fragment, freeing it from the surrounding tissue. Foster assists, holding the retractors to keep the wound open, passing instruments without being asked. The fragment comes out cleanly. Brenneman examines it under the light. The edges are sharp and irregular, like a piece of broken glass. It would have sliced through muscle like a saw. Fragment 2. The first hour ends. Matthias is stable. Blood pressure acceptable. Heart rate elevated but steady. Brenneman looks at the clock. 7 more fragments to go. Hour 2. The abdominal wounds are next. 4 fragments clustered around the stomach and liver. These are the most dangerous. One wrong move and Brenneman could perforate the bowel or lacerate the liver. Either mistake would be fatal. He makes the third incision, a long vertical cut down the left side of the abdomen. The tissue here is inflamed, chronically irritated by the presence of foreign metal. The fragments have been inside Matthias for 4 months, since December 1944. The first abdominal fragment is embedded in the external oblique muscle, superficial and easy to remove. Fragment 3 comes out without complication. The second abdominal fragment is deeper. Brenneman follows it down through layers of muscle and fascia until he reaches the peritoneum, the membrane that lines the abdominal cavity. The fragment is pressing against it from the outside, creating a small bulge. He removes it carefully. Fragment 4. The third abdominal fragment is the one that terrifies him. It is lodged in the tissue just lateral to the liver, less than 1 centimeter from the organ's surface. The X-ray showed this clearly, but seeing it in person is different. The fragment is a jagged piece of grenade shrapnel, all sharp angles and points. If this fragment had traveled 1 centimeter to the right during the past 4 months, it would have penetrated the liver. Matthias would have bled to death internally, probably within hours. Brenneman does not think about that. He focuses on the task. He dissects around the fragment with extreme care, using the smallest instruments, checking the position with every movement. Foster watches silently, holding his breath. The fragment is freed. Brenneman grasps it with forceps and lifts it out in one smooth motion. Fragment 5. He allows himself a moment to breathe. The fourth abdominal fragment is pressing against the lower edge of the stomach. Removal is straightforward, but Brenneman is meticulous. He cannot afford any mistakes this deep in the abdomen. Fragment 6 comes out cleanly, 4 fragments removed from the abdomen. No perforations, no bleeding. The clock shows 9:15. 2 hours and 15 minutes elapsed. Brenneman steps back from the table. A nurse wipes sweat from his forehead. He drinks water, flexes his hands, and returns to work. Hour 3. The chest wounds are next. The 3 fragments that have been inside Matthias the longest. Since August 1944. 8 months. These fragments are smaller than the others, consistent with artillery shrapnel, but they are embedded in scar tissue that has hardened around them. Removing them will require cutting through tissue that healed incorrectly. Brenneman makes the 7th incision over the first chest wound, high on the right pectoral muscle. The scar tissue is dense and white, harder than normal muscle. He cuts through it carefully. The fragment is deep lodged against the 3rd rib. The surrounding bone shows evidence of an old fracture that healed on its own without proper alignment. The rib has a small notch where the fragment impacted and the bone grew back around the injury. Brenneman removes the fragment. It is small, almost delicate, a perfect triangle of steel. Fragment 7. The 8th incision reveals similar findings. Fragment embedded against bone. Improper healing. Evidence of trauma that received no medical attention. Fragment 8. The 9th incision is over the sternum, the breastbone. This is the most dangerous of the chest wounds because of the proximity to the heart and major blood vessels. Brenneman cuts down carefully. The fragment is lodged in the pectoralis major muscle, just lateral to the sternum. It has created a small cavity in the muscle, and the tissue around it is calcified, turned to stone by the body's attempt to isolate the foreign object. He works slowly, dissecting the fragment, free millimeter by millimeter. And then, without warning, Matthias's heart rate drops. The anesthesiologist calls out the numbers. 100 beats per minute. 80. 60. Brenneman looks up at the monitor. The heart rate is falling rapidly. 50 beats per minute. 40. The anesthesiologist increases the oxygen flow. He checks the IV line. Everything is functioning normally. 30 beats per minute. 20. 15. The monitor flatlines. Cardiac arrest. Brenneman drops his instruments and moves to the head of the table. He places both hands on Matthias's chest and begins compressions. Fast and hard, pushing down 2 inches with each compression, exactly as he has done 100 times before in field hospitals. The nurses spring into action. One prepares epinephrine, the other monitors the airway. Foster takes over the compressions while Brenneman administers the epinephrine directly into the IV line. 30 seconds. No response. 60 seconds. Still flatlined. Brenneman returns to compressions. He counts in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pushing down, releasing, pushing down, releasing. 90 seconds. The nurse beside him speaks quietly. Major, we should consider stopping. Brenneman does not stop. He does not even acknowledge the suggestion. He thinks about David's letter, about the promise he made to himself in the middle of the night, about the boy on the table who survived 3 combat wounds and 9 months of infection and a firing squad of his own officers. This boy did not survive all of that, just to die on a surgical table in Mississippi. Brenneman continues compressions. 2 minutes, and then a blip on the monitor, a single heartbeat, then another. Then a rhythm. The heart rate climbs slowly. 20 beats per minute. 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100. Stable. Brenneman steps back, breathing hard. His hands are shaking. Foster is staring at him. That was close, Foster says quietly. Too close, Brenneman agrees. But they are not finished. There is still 1 fragment left. Hour 4. Brenneman returns to the 9th incision, the one over the sternum. The fragment is still there, half exposed, waiting. He works more carefully now, hyper-aware of every movement, every change in the monitors. His hands are steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. The fragment comes free. The last one. The 9th piece of metal that has been slowly killing Matthias Keller for the past 8 months. Fragment 9. Brenneman places it in the tray with the others and looks at the collection. 9 pieces of metal. Different sizes, different shapes, different origins. A timeline of violence written in steel and copper. Now comes the closing. He irrigates each wound again, checking for bleeding, checking for any debris he might have missed. Everything is clean. He begins to suture, layer by layer, muscle, fascia, skin, each stitch precise and tight. The nurses count the instruments to make sure nothing has been left inside the patient. All accounted for. At 11:45 in the morning, 4 hours and 45 minutes after the first incision, Brenneman places the final suture. The surgery is complete. Matthias Keller's torso is covered in fresh bandages and stitches. He has lost nearly a pint of blood during the procedure. His vital signs are weak but stable. His heart stopped once and was restarted, but he is alive. The nurses prepare to move him to the intensive care section, a small room with 4 beds where the sickest patients are monitored around the clock. IV lines are already set up ready to deliver fluids and blood plasma. Brenneman strips off his surgical gloves and gown. His arms ache. His back is tight from standing hunched over the table for nearly 5 hours. Foster approaches him. I have never seen anyone bring a patient back from arrest that quickly. Brenneman shakes his head. I did not bring him back. He brought himself back. He is stronger than he looks. Foster glances toward the gurney where Matthias lies unconscious. Do you think he will make it? Brenneman looks at the metal tray containing the 9 fragments. I do not know. The next 48 hours will tell us everything. But privately, Brenneman allows himself a small measure of hope. The boy survived the surgery. He survived cardiac arrest. If he can survive the next 2 days without infection or complications, he has a chance. A real chance. Matthias is moved to the intensive care room at noon. Brenneman follows, watching as the nurses settle him into the bed, adjust the IV lines, check his pulse and blood pressure. Then, Brenneman does something he has not done since his days in the field hospitals. He pulls a chair up beside the bed and sits down. He will stay here, monitor the patient himself, watch for any signs of deterioration. The nurses offer to take shifts, but Brenneman declines. This one is mine, he says. Hour 12. Matthias's fever begins to climb. By 6 in the evening, his temperature has reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit. His body is shaking, fighting the residual infection that the surgery could not eliminate. Brenneman applies cold compresses. He monitors the fever closely, checking every 30 minutes. 104.5, 105. The fever spikes are normal after a surgery of this magnitude. But if the temperature climbs above 106, brain damage becomes a risk. Brenneman does not leave the bedside. Hour 18. Midnight. The fever has not broken. Matthias is soaked with sweat. His breathing is shallow and rapid. The nurses change the sheets twice. Brenneman watches the rise and fall of the boy's chest, counting breaths, listening for any change in the rhythm. In the dim light of the intensive care room, Matthias looks even younger than 18. His face is gaunt, his cheekbones sharp under pale skin. Without the dirt and exhaustion of arrival, Brenneman can see the boy he must have been before the war, before the conscription, before the wounds. He thinks about Matthias's father, somewhere in Germany, possibly dead in the rubble of Dresden. He thinks about the mother who died when Matthias was 12, the brother killed on the Eastern Front. This boy has lost everything, everyone, and yet he is still fighting. Hour 24. 6 in the morning on April 25th. 24 hours post-surgery. Matthias's heart rate drops again. Not as severe as during the surgery, but enough to trigger the alarms. Brenneman is on his feet immediately. He checks the IV lines, checks the monitors. Everything is functioning. The heart rate continues to fall. 70 beats per minute. 60, 50, 40, 30. Brenneman does not hesitate. He begins chest compressions again, pushing down hard on the sternum, careful to avoid the fresh incisions. A nurse rushes in with epinephrine. The compressions continue. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. And again, impossibly, the heart responds. The rate climbs slowly back to normal. Brenneman steps back, breathing hard. Twice. The boy's heart has stopped twice, and twice he has come back. The nurse looks at Brenneman with something like awe. He is a fighter. Yes, Brenneman says. He is. Hour 36, noon on April 25th, 36 hours post-surgery. The fever is still elevated, but it has stopped climbing. 104 degrees, holding steady. Matthias has not regained consciousness. His breathing is regular but shallow. Brenneman has not slept in nearly 2 days. His eyes are burning. His body is exhausted. But he refuses to leave. The nurses bring him food. He eats mechanically, not tasting anything. Hour 48, 6 in the evening on April 25th. 48 hours post-surgery. Brenneman is half asleep in the chair beside the bed when he hears a change in Matthias's breathing. He opens his eyes and looks at the boy. The fever is breaking. He can see it in the way the sweat is drying on Matthias's forehead, in the slight relaxation of his facial muscles. Brenneman checks the temperature. 101 degrees, down 3 degrees in the past hour. The body is winning the fight. By midnight, the fever has dropped to 99 degrees. By 2 in the morning on April 26th, it is normal, 98.6. Matthias's breathing deepens and slows, the shallow, rapid breaths of fever replaced by the steady rhythm of healing sleep. Brenneman allows himself to believe for the first time that the boy will survive. Hour 72, 7 in the morning on April 27th, 3 days post-surgery. Brenneman is dozing in the chair when he hears a sound, a soft intake of breath different from the rhythm of sleep. He opens his eyes. Matthias Keller is awake. His eyes are open, staring at the ceiling, confused, disoriented. Brenneman leans forward. "Matthias, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes shift toward the sound. He tries to speak, but his throat is dry. No sound comes out. A nurse brings water. Brenneman lifts Matthias's head slightly and holds the cup to his lips. The boy drinks in small sips. Then he speaks. His voice is a whisper. "Where am I?" "You are in the hospital. You are safe." Matthias blinks slowly, processing this information. His eyes move around the room, taking in the white walls, the other beds, the IV stand beside him. Then he looks down at his torso, at the bandages covering the incision sites. "Am I still infected?" Brenneman shakes his head. "No. The metal is gone. You are clean." Matthias stares at him for a long moment, and then, to Brenneman's surprise, tears begin to run down the boy's face. Not tears of pain, tears of relief. For 9 months, Matthias Keller has carried death inside his body, 9 pieces of metal slowly poisoning him. And now, finally, they are gone. He cries silently, his chest hitching with suppressed sobs. Brenneman does not speak. He simply sits beside the bed and waits. After a few minutes, Matthias wipes his eyes with the back of his hand. "Why did you save me?" Brenneman considers the question. There are many answers he could give. Professional duty, the Geneva Conventions, basic human decency. But he thinks about David, about the last letter, about the promise. "Because you deserve to be saved." Matthias looks at him with an expression Brenneman cannot quite read. Confusion, gratitude, disbelief. "I am your enemy." "You were my patient," Brenneman says quietly. "That is all that mattered." Matthias closes his eyes. He is exhausted, overwhelmed, still processing the fact that he is alive. Brenneman stands up. "Rest now. We will talk more later." But before he leaves the room, Matthias speaks again. "Thank you." Brenneman nods. He does not trust himself to respond. He walks out of the intensive care room and down the hallway to his office. He closes the door and sits at his desk. The metal tray is still there, containing the 9 fragments. Brenneman picks up each piece, examining it under the light. Artillery shrapnel from France, grenade fragments from Belgium, bullet fragments from Germany. A timeline of the war's collapse written in the body of an 18-year-old boy. Brenneman opens his desk drawer and takes out David's photograph. He looks at his son's face for a long time. "I kept my promise," he says quietly. Then he puts the photograph away and returns to work. 5 days after the surgery, Captain Leonard Moss arrives at the Camp McCain Hospital carrying a leather briefcase and a notepad. Moss is an intelligence officer assigned to the camp specifically to interview German prisoners and compile reports for the War Department. He is 32 years old, a former journalist from Boston who joined the army in 1942 and discovered he had a talent for extracting information from reluctant sources. But Matthias Keller is not a reluctant source. When Moss enters the intensive care room and introduces himself, Matthias agrees to the interview immediately. He is sitting up in bed now, his torso still wrapped in bandages, an intravenous line running into his arm. His color is better, his eyes are clearer. Moss pulls a chair up beside the bed and opens his notepad. "I need you to tell me your story from the beginning, starting with your conscription." Matthias nods. He has told parts of this story to Major Brenneman, but never the complete version, never with the kind of detail that Moss is requesting. He begins. I received the conscription notice in July 1944. I had just turned 16. The letter told me to report to a training facility in Saxony within 1 week. If I did not report, my family would be investigated for subversion. Moss writes this down. What kind of training did you receive 2 weeks? We learned to march, to follow orders, to fire a rifle. That was all. There was no time for anything else. The trainers were old men, veterans of the First War. They told us we were the future of Germany. They told us the Reich would be victorious. But I could see in their eyes that they did not believe it. Moss asks about the training camp itself. How many boys? What ages? What conditions? Matthias answers every question. There were maybe 300 of us. Some were 15, some were 17. One boy was 14. He looked 12. We slept in barracks with no heat. The food was bread and thin soup. Many of the boys were sick within days. And after training, we were assigned to units and sent west. I was sent to France, to an infantry division defending against the Allied advance from Normandy. I arrived in early August. 3 days later, I was in combat. Moss leans forward. Describe the combat. Matthias closes his eyes, remembering. We were told to hold a position outside a village. I do not remember the name of the village. We dug trenches and waited. The artillery started at dawn. It did not stop for 6 hours. The shells came in waves. You could hear them before they hit. A whistling sound, then the impact, then the screaming. He pauses. The boy next to me in the trench was hit in the first hour. He was 17, from Bavaria. I never learned his name. The shell landed 3 meters away, and he was just gone. Not wounded. Gone. Moss writes carefully, capturing every detail. And your wounds? On the 3rd day, a shell landed close enough to throw me backward. I woke up on the ground. I could not breathe. My chest was bleeding from 3 places. I thought I was dying. But you did not die. No. A medic came. He pulled the largest piece of shrapnel out with forceps. No medicine for the pain. He wrapped the wounds with gauze and told me to get back to my position. I asked if I could go to a hospital. He laughed. He said there were no hospitals, only the front line. Moss stops writing and looks at Matthias. They sent you back to combat with untreated wounds. Yes. There was no choice. The unit was retreating. Anyone who could walk was expected to fight. I fought through August and September. The wounds hurt constantly. I could not lift my arms above my head. But I kept fighting because the alternative was to be shot as a deserter. Moss asks about the retreat across France. The conditions. The losses. Matthias describes it all, the constant bombardment. The nights spent in bombed-out buildings with no food and no rest. The officers who executed men for falling asleep on watch. The slow disintegration of the unit as soldiers deserted or were killed or simply disappeared. By October, Matthias says half of my unit was gone. We were supposed to be a battalion of 800 men. We were down to maybe 400, and most of those were boys like me, 16, 17 years old, wounded and sick and exhausted. And then Belgium. Matthias opens his eyes. Yes, Belgium. December, the Battle of the Bulge. He describes the offensive, the desperation of it, the propaganda that told them this would turn the tide of the war, the reality of walking into American artillery and machine gun fire. We attacked on the morning of December 16th. It was snowing. We had no winter clothing. Many of the men had no boots, just rags wrapped around their feet. We advanced through the forest, and the Americans cut us down. How long did the offensive last for your unit? 3 days. Then we were retreating again. On the 3rd day, my squad was sheltering in a stone building, a farmhouse. We thought we were safe. Then someone threw a grenade through the window. Matthias touches his abdomen gently, feeling the bandages beneath his hospital gown. I woke up on the floor. 2 men were dead. 3 others were wounded. I had 4 new holes in my body. I could feel the blood running down my sides. There was no medic this time. I tore strips from a dead man's shirt and wrapped the wounds myself. Moss watches him carefully. And you kept fighting. What else could I do? If I stayed behind, I would freeze to death or be captured by the Soviets. If I deserted, I would be shot by my own officers. So I kept moving. I kept fighting. I survived December. I survived January. I survived February and March. Every day I thought would be my last. But I kept waking up. Moss asks the question that matters most for his report. When did you realize Germany had lost the war? Matthias does not hesitate. In Belgium, maybe earlier. By December, anyone who was not insane knew we had lost. The officers knew it, the soldiers knew it, but no one could say it out loud. To say it was treason. So we kept fighting a war we had already lost. And in April, everything collapsed. The front dissolved. Units were surrendering in groups, hundreds at a time, thousands. The officers tried to stop it. They threatened executions. Some of them carried out the executions. But it did not matter. The war was over. Everyone knew it. Moss turns to a fresh page in his notepad. Tell me about the Elbe River. Matthias takes a deep breath. This part is harder. My unit was near the river in mid-April. We had orders to retreat west toward the American lines. The officers said we would be treated better by the Americans than by the Soviets. But they also said that anyone who tried to surrender would be shot as a deserter. A contradiction. Yes, we were supposed to retreat but not surrender. It made no sense. So a group of us, maybe 30 men, decided we would surrender together. If we all went at once, we thought they could not stop us. But they did stop you. Matthias nods slowly. We walked toward the American lines with our hands raised. We were maybe 100 meters from the German positions when the machine guns opened fire. From behind us, our own officers shooting at us. How many were killed? Half, maybe more. I was hit twice, once in the back, once in the ribs. I fell into a ditch and lay there. I could hear the shooting continuing. Men screaming. Then silence. How long were you in the ditch? 6 hours, maybe longer. I lost consciousness. When I woke up, it was dark. American soldiers were moving through the area checking the bodies. One of them found me. He called for a medic. They gave me water and morphine. Then they put me on a truck with other prisoners. Moss writes for a long time without speaking. Then he looks up. Do you know the names of the officers who gave the order to fire number 1? I never saw them. I only heard the machine guns. Would you testify about this if asked? Matthias meets his eyes. Yes. Moss closes his notepad. He has what he needs. Testimony from a German soldier about war crimes committed by the German military against its own troops. It will go into the growing file of evidence being compiled for the tribunals. But before he leaves, he asks one more question. What do you think should happen to the officers who did this? Matthias is quiet for a moment. I do not know. I do not think about justice anymore. I only think about surviving. Moss stands and picks up his briefcase. You have survived. Against remarkable odds. Yes, Matthias says quietly. But I do not know why. After Moss leaves, Matthias sits alone in the hospital bed staring at the wall. He thinks about the 30 men who walked toward the American lines with their hands raised. Most of them are dead now, all except him. The question returns, as it always does, why a nurse comes in to check his bandages. She is kind, efficient. She asks if he needs anything. He says no. When she leaves, he closes his eyes and tries to sleep. But sleep does not come easily anymore. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the muzzle flashes from the German machine guns, hears the screaming, feels the impact of the bullets entering his body. He wonders if this will ever stop, if he will ever be able to close his eyes without seeing death. 2 weeks after the surgery, Dr. Samuel Rubin arrives at Camp McCain. Rubin is a psychiatrist, a captain in the Army Medical Corps, who visits the camp once a week to evaluate prisoners with mental health issues. He is 45 years old, originally from New York, with a calm demeanor and an ability to make people talk about things they would rather keep hidden. Major Brenneman requested the consultation personally. He has noticed that Matthias does not sleep well, that he wakes up several times each night gasping and staring at the ceiling, that he refuses to talk about his dreams. Rubin sits down beside Matthias's bed and introduces himself. I am here to talk if you want to talk. Nothing you say will go into your official record. This is just between us. Matthias looks at him warily. What do you want to know? Whatever you want to tell me. Matthias is silent for a long time. Then he speaks. I do not feel like a soldier. I never wanted to fight. I was ordered to fight, and I obeyed because the alternative was execution. Does that make me a coward? Rubin shakes his head. It makes you a survivor. I killed men during the war. I do not know how many. I do not even know if they were enemies. In the chaos, everyone was shooting at everyone. I would aim my rifle and pull the trigger, and sometimes men would fall and sometimes they would not. I do not know if I killed them or if someone else did. He pauses. Does that make me a murderer? Were you trying to kill them or were you trying to survive? Matthias thinks about this. Both. Neither. I do not know. Rubin asks about the nightmares. Matthias describes them. The artillery, the grenade, the machine gun fire from behind, the faces of the dead. And when you wake up, how do you feel? Guilty. Why? Because I am alive, and they are dead. Because I survived and they did not. Because there is no reason for it, no logic, just random chance. Rubin listens without judgment. He has heard this before. Survivor's guilt, a common response to trauma, but knowing the name for it does not make it easier to bear. Do you think about the future? Matthias shakes his head. I do not have a future. I have no family, no home, no country that I recognize. When I go back to Germany, what will I go back to? Ruins and graves? You do not have to go back. Where else would I go? Rubin does not answer. The question is too large, too complicated. They talk for 2 hours. Rubin asks careful questions, and Matthias answers them slowly, opening up about things he has never said out loud. The fear, the exhaustion, the sense that he is broken in ways that cannot be fixed. When the session ends, Rubin writes a detailed report. He notes that Matthias exhibits signs of severe trauma, survivor's guilt, depression, dissociation. He recommends long-term psychiatric care and transfer to a facility that can provide it. But he also notes something else. Despite everything, Matthias has not lost his humanity. He is polite to the nurses. He thanks the doctors. He asks about the other patients in the ward. The war has damaged him, but it has not destroyed him. Rubin writes, Matthias Keller is proof that even the most brutal experiences cannot completely erase a person's capacity for decency if that capacity was there to begin with. In late May 1945, Matthias is transferred to a hospital camp in Texas. The facility is smaller than Camp McCain, holding only 200 German prisoners, all of them with chronic medical conditions or disabilities. It has a full medical staff including surgeons, psychiatrists, and physical therapists. Matthias will spend the next 6 months there undergoing rehabilitation. The work is slow. His muscles have atrophied from months of malnutrition and infection. The surgical incisions have healed into thick scars that restrict his movement. He has to relearn how to lift his arms above his head without pain, how to bend at the waist, how to breathe deeply. The physical therapist is a sergeant from Texas, a former high school coach who treats Matthias with a combination of firmness and patience. You are young, the therapist says. Your body will heal, but you have to work for it. Matthias works. Every day he does the exercises, stretching, light weights, walking. It hurts, but it is a different kind of hurt than the infection. This is the hurt of healing. He also attends group counseling sessions with other young prisoners. Boys who were conscripted at 15, 16, 17. Boys who saw things no child should see. Boys who are trying to figure out how to live with what they have done and what has been done to them. In these sessions, Matthias begins to talk more openly. He tells his story. He listens to their stories. He realizes he is not alone. One of the other prisoners, a 19-year-old from Hamburg, tells Matthias something that stays with him. We were all just trying to survive. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to build on. Matthias thinks about this. He has spent so much time feeling guilty for surviving that he has not considered what survival might mean, what he might do with the life that was saved. In the evenings, he writes letters to the International Red Cross asking them to search for his father in Germany. He provides the name, the town, the last known address. He does not expect a response, but he writes anyway. He also asks the camp librarian for books in German. He reads everything he can find: novels, history, poetry. He is trying to fill the gaps in his education, the years he lost to the war. He was 16 when he was conscripted. He never finished school. Now, at 18, he is trying to catch up on everything he missed. The librarian, an older woman from San Antonio, notices his dedication. She starts bringing him books from her personal collection: Goethe, Schiller, Thomas Mann. "You are a smart boy," she tells him. "You should continue your education when this is over." Matthias does not know if that will be possible, but he appreciates the encouragement. In August 1945, the letter from the International Red Cross arrives. Matthias opens it with shaking hands. The Red Cross has searched the records in the area around Dresden. They have checked the lists of survivors and the lists of casualties. His father's name does not appear on either list. The town where Matthias grew up was heavily bombed in February 1945. 70% of the buildings were destroyed. The population was scattered. Many people fled to the countryside. Many others died in the bombing or in the chaos that followed. The Red Cross cannot confirm whether Matthias's father is alive or dead. His status is listed as unknown. Matthias reads the letter 3 times. Then he folds it carefully and puts it in the drawer beside his bed. He does not cry. He does not react visibly. He simply sits on the edge of his bed and stares at the wall. A nurse finds him like that an hour later and asks if he is all right. "Yes," he says, "I am all right." But he is not all right. He has just learned that he is functionally an orphan. His mother died when he was 12. His brother died on the Eastern Front. His father is missing, probably dead. He has no family, no home, no one waiting for him in Germany. He is completely alone. That night, he does not sleep. He lies in bed and thinks about what it means to have nothing. No past to return to. No future that he can see clearly. But in the morning, he gets up and goes to physical therapy. He does his exercises. He eats breakfast. He continues. Because that is what survivors do. In early 1946, Matthias is transferred back to Camp McCain. He is no longer a hospital patient. He is a general population prisoner assigned to a work detail on a nearby farm. The work is light planting cotton and repairing fences, chosen specifically because it will not strain his healing wounds. He lives in the barracks with other German prisoners. He eats in the mess hall. He attends occasional education classes taught by volunteers from the local community. The other prisoners are wary of him at first. His story has spread through the camp. The boy with 9 wounds. The boy who survived a 5-hour surgery. Some of the older prisoners resent the fact that he received such extensive medical care while they were left to recover on their own. But Matthias ignores the resentment. He keeps to himself. He focuses on his work. He reads in the evenings. Slowly, he earns a reputation as someone reliable. The guards like him. The farm supervisors like him. The camp administrators note in his file, Matthias Keller is a model prisoner. Cooperative, hard-working. In June 1946, Major Elliot Brenneman comes to visit. He is preparing to leave the army and return to his practice in Atlanta. Before he goes, he wants to see Matthias one more time. They meet in the hospital in the same examination room where Brenneman first saw the 9 wounds. Matthias is healthier now. He has gained weight, 26 pounds since his arrival at the camp. His face has filled out. His color is good. The scars on his torso are visible when he lifts his shirt, thick white lines against pale skin, but they have healed cleanly. Brenneman examines him briefly, more out of habit than necessity. "You look well. I feel well. Better than I have felt in years." They sit down and talk. Brenneman asks about the plans for repatriation. Matthias explains that he will probably be sent back to Germany sometime in 1947 once the Allied authorities have processed the backlog of prisoners. What will you do when you go home? Matthias shakes his head. I have no home. Germany is destroyed. My family is gone. So what will you do? I will survive. That is what I do. Brenneman is quiet for a moment. Then he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small wooden box. I want you to have this. He opens the box. Inside are 9 pieces of metal, the 9 fragments removed from Matthias's body during the surgery. Brenneman had them cleaned and preserved. Each one is labeled with a number and a location. Fragment 1, lower left ribs, fragment 2, lower back, and so on. Matthias stares at the box. Why? Because they are part of your story, and your story matters. Matthias picks up one of the fragments. Fragment 5, the one that was lodged 1 centimeter from his liver, the one that could have killed him if it had moved even slightly during the 9 months it was inside him. He holds it up to the light, turning it slowly. I carried these for 9 months, and I did not die. Now I do not have to carry them anymore. Brenneman nods. You are tougher than any soldier I have ever treated. Remember that. They talk for another hour. Brenneman tells Matthias about his plans to return to Atlanta to rebuild his practice to try to move forward. He does not mention David directly, but Matthias senses the grief beneath the surface. When it is time for Brenneman to leave, they shake hands. Thank you, Matthias says. For everything. You do not need to thank me. You saved yourself. No, Matthias says quietly. You saved me. You fought for me when no one else would. Brenneman does not trust himself to respond. He simply nods and walks away. Matthias watches him go. Then he closes the wooden box and holds it carefully in both hands. In 1947, Matthias is repatriated to Germany. He returns to his hometown and finds it exactly as the Red Cross described. Ruins. Rubble. A landscape of destruction. The house where he grew up is gone, replaced by a pile of broken bricks and charred wood. He searches the records at the town hall, rebuilt in a temporary structure. His father's name appears on a list of missing persons. Not confirmed dead, not confirmed alive, just missing. Matthias walks through the graveyard and looks at the markers. Many of them are labeled unknown. He does not know if his father is buried beneath one of these markers, or if he died somewhere else, or if he is still alive, lost in the chaos of post-war Germany. He will never know. After 2 weeks, Matthias leaves the town and travels west. He has heard that there are programs to help refugees resettle, programs that will take young men with skills and give them a chance to start over. In 1948, he applies for immigration to the United States. The application process takes 2 years. Background checks, interviews, medical examinations. But in 1950, he is approved. Matthias Keller becomes Matthew Keller. He boards a ship in Hamburg and sails to New York. From there, he travels to Ohio, where a church group has sponsored his resettlement. He finds work as a carpenter. He learns English. He saves money. In 1952, he marries a German-American woman named Anna. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. He teaches his children German. He tells them about the old country, but he does not tell them about the war. Not in detail, not the parts that still wake him up at night. He builds a quiet life, a normal life, the kind of life he never thought he would have. In 1979, he receives a letter from Atlanta. Major Elliot Brenneman has died, heart attack, age 76. The funeral will be held the following week. Matthew takes time off from work and drives to Atlanta. He attends the funeral and stands in the back of the church listening to people talk about the doctor who saved so many lives. After the service, he visits the grave. He places flowers on the fresh earth, 9 white roses, 1 for each fragment, and he adds something to the headstone. A small brass plaque paid for with his own money, engraved with a single line. He saved enemies so they could become friends. The cemetery groundskeeper installs it that afternoon. Every year after that, on the anniversary of the surgery, Matthew returns to Atlanta. He brings 9 white roses and places them on Brenneman's grave. He never misses a year. In 1985, Matthew is invited to speak at a World War II museum in Ohio. He is 59 years old now. His hair is grey. His body shows the wear of decades of physical labor. But his mind is sharp and his memory is clear. He brings the wooden box that Brenneman gave him, the one containing the 9 metal fragments. He stands in front of a small audience and tells his story. The conscription, the wounds, the surgery, the survival. And then he opens the box and shows them the fragments. These 9 pieces of metal are why I am American today, he says. Not because America was perfect, but because when I was the enemy, they still saw me as human. He donates the fragments to the museum. They are placed in a display case with a label explaining their significance. From the body of Matthias Keller, known as Matthew Keller, age 18, German prisoner of war, removed April 24th, 1945, Camp McCain, Mississippi, by Major Elliot Brenneman, donated 1985. These fragments represent not just the wounds of war, but the power of mercy to heal even the deepest divisions. Matthew Keller dies in 2010 at the age of 84. He is surrounded by his children and grandchildren, people who exist because an American doctor decided that even enemies deserve a second chance. The funeral is held in Ohio. The obituary mentions his service in the German military briefly, but it focuses on his life in America, the family he built, the community he served, the quiet dignity with which he lived. At the museum in Ohio, the display case containing the 9 fragments remains. Visitors stop to read the label. They look at the twisted pieces of metal and try to imagine what it would be like to carry them inside your body for 9 months, to be wounded 3 times and sent back to fight each time, to survive all of that and then be saved by the very people you were told to hate. The fragments sit in the case, silent witnesses to a story that most people never knew. A story about a boy who became a soldier against his will, who carried 9 pieces of death inside his body for 9 months, who was shot by 3 different armies in 3 different countries, who survived because one doctor refused to let an enemy die. A story about a father who lost his son to war and saved another man's son to keep a promise. A story about 9 pieces of metal that were meant to kill, but instead became a bridge between enemies. Matthias Keller was 16 when Germany gave him a rifle. He was 18 when America gave him a future. He was 59 when he gave those 9 fragments to a museum so that others might understand what he learned in a hospital room in Mississippi in April of 1945. That mercy is stronger than metal, that compassion can survive even in the machinery of war, and that sometimes the enemy who saves your life becomes the country you call home. The boy with 9 wounds became the man who lived 84 years, not because of the war that broke him, but because of the doctor who put him back together. This is his story, and it deserves to be remembered.